welcome, Joshua. Let me check and make sure. Yes, we are recording. Good. So welcome. I want to go ahead and open up, first of all, Dry Knot, which I realized on the way over here I should have called it Wet. But you know, you do what you can. So this is a function that I have called Dry Knot, and I have a little URL here. Let me pull it up here. I am demonstrating to you the importance of making dry code. You will recall that dry, D-R-Y, stands for don't repeat yourself, not do repeat yourself. Don't repeat yourself. You want to put a line of code in there one time whenever possible rather than duplicating it in multiple places. The way you do that normally is by introducing functions that do repeated activities, and then you just call that function rather than doing those repeated activities in a repeated, over and over, redundant way. Okay, yes, that was saying that redundantly. All right, so to illustrate the need for this, I have come up with a simple little program where I take the high scores, for several of you are doing games, I take the high scores, I have them in a list, in a descending list, and I want to print them off in this way. When your name is being printed, the user who is logged in, I want to highlight it, I want to emphasize it. When it is someone in my group, I want to print the score and the person's name. And if it's somebody outside of my group, then I don't want to print the person's name for privacy reasons. All right, it's kind of a contrived example, but work with me here. So you can see the kind of thing that I've got up here. And when I open up Dry Knot here, this is what you see. Oops. This is what you see. Here's simply setting my array. Normally you would have gotten this with a query followed by a series of fetches. All right, but this is, you've got the groups, you've got the users, you've got the names, and you've got the scores in descending order. Clear so far? Yeah. No?
So this is not using SQL?
This is not using SQL. This is a contrived example, but this is the data. This makes it real clear to you what the data is that I'm looking for.
So it would be using SQL in our example?
In your examples, you would have gotten this data from SQL rather than just hard coding it. Okay? So this is just for example purposes. All right? So how do I actually do the thing? Well, I say table at the top, close table tag at the bottom, and then in between I say if request user equals the current user, then do such and such. Otherwise, if the group matches my group, then do such and such. Otherwise, it's neither the user nor a matching group, then print this, where you're printing the name, you're printing not in your group rather than name. See how I do that? Now, what's repeated in here? Okay. This echo sign is very, very similar, repeated 3 times. Do you see that? It's row, 2 columns, close row, right? And almost the same thing in both of them. Almost the same thing, but not quite. That's exactly where it becomes difficult. Now, let me just show you very quickly where the disadvantage is if I do not do dry, if I have wet code like I have up here. Take the program as below, but change user to come before score. I realize, oh, it's kind of stupid to list it like this. In every high score table in the world, you always list the user first and then the high score. So what do I have to do? Well, I have to come to the, let's see, where is it here? Okay, here's where I have my score. And so I come and I put this here. Good, okay, got it. Did that work? Oh, what? No, that's not, oh, I forgot in the second one down there. Oh yeah, I have to do this. Okay, so I take this and I put this before, and I save it and I do it. What? Not in your group? Oh yes, I've got the third one out there. Now, we're seeing this very quickly, right? But normally when you're doing your coding, you would probably miss these tiny little details. Very easy to make mistakes like this when you have wet code, non-dry code, because you have to make the exact same change in every single place. So I come down here, come here and do it. Great. Everything's working. Now, what's the next thing that's coming up? Okay. Oh, I forgot the closing TR tag. And if I come over here and I pull this up, you'll notice that I've got not in your group, TD, close TD, oh, close TR. Where's the close TR? Oops, got to put that in. So I come along here and I close TR. And not to be redundant, but I would go out there and I would save and I realize, oh, some of them came in, but some of them didn't come in. Oh yeah, I have to come up and do it here. Oh, oops, and see
You might
it.
not
Put
notice
it.
this too, if some of the scores of the affected type aren't in
They
the
don't
data
show
at
up,
the time.
right? Because maybe they won't come up every time. So finally I get this here, I bring it over here, and okay, sure enough, I've got all my TRs in there. Is everything working? Yep, everything's working well. Now, if I wanted to add the group number in here, what would I have to do? Now I would have to come down here, and I would have to add, once again, I would have to say TD group, close TD, and then I'd have to remember to do it again in the same way down here and here. So 3 times I've made the same change, and I've got to make exactly the same change. Vim helps me to do that because I can just press dot and it does exactly the same thing that I just did on the previous one. So let's see if that did it. Did that make my change? Okay, so that's printing off my change, and everything worked fine. But you saw how I had to do it over and over again, and I'm only dealing with 3 things repeated. There are going to be times where if you're not careful, you're going to have 50 things repeated, doing the same thing 50 times, and you say, it's too much work to put in a function. And then you realize, oh, I have to change that. And then it becomes a real pain in the neck. So let's look at a different example that is, as might be expected, dry rather than dry not. So actually it's a little bit longer. What? I'm getting longer code? Yes, you are, but it's so much more maintainable. So here's my code. When I come up here and I change dry to dry not, oops. Helps if you delete your N instead of your period. Now I come up and I did an extra little bit of formatting there. That's why you've got the red up there. And we've got the same table that we started with, except this time when I want to take the program as below but change user to come before score, I come down here. Notice I've called printline, and I've created a function down here, printline. I've handed in the name and the score and whether or not it's emphasized. See how that works? And I want to make a change here where I'm putting the name in front of the score. And I save it, and boom. One change, all 3 conditions were taken care of. Wait a second, I forgot my TR. No problem. One change, and voila, all my TRs are put into place. And I want to add in the group. Oh, wait a minute, this is actually a little bit more difficult because I don't have access to group down here. So what I'm going to have to do now, and this is where it comes in, you need to plan ahead and design your functions well, because now I'm going to have to do this. That's great, but now I've called this function 3 times. So now I'm going to have to come up here and do this. And I end up not being nearly as dry because I didn't design it well. So you have to think ahead, what are the possible values that you may need down in that function in order to prevent being wet.
Now
Okay?
the feature made it just drier now than it was?
Pardon?
You just made it drier now?
Well, it was dry before, but I made it designed in such a way that even if I wanted to do something further, more advanced, add more functionality later on, I now have access to more information in there. Okay? All right. That gives you an emphasis on dry. One simple little example that I find myself doing all the time is I take my SQL and I prepare a statement and I do my query and then I do my fetches, right? but then maybe later on down the line I want to change that in some way. Like I'm going to handle my errors differently. Whenever I get an error, I want it to check automatically, and I want my program to die with an error right there. So what I will do is I will write a DB query function, which I use from all of my scripts in this whole thing, which says, take a string, your $SQL, all right, run the PDO query, make sure you've got a connection there, run the PDO query, check the errors. If there's any errors, then die with a fatal error. I do that, and then I don't have to keep checking my errors every time I turn around, because that's happening just one time in my function. Does that make sense? I'll pull an example up of that in a minute. Right now, I want to pull over and look at when you're doing functions so that you understand global variables and so that you understand arguments well. You may have already dealt with this, you may not have already dealt with this, but we're going to go with it one step at a time. Let's see, where did I put here? Yeah. All right. So, we're going to start off with looking at global variables. And but you define a global variable just by creating it or using it outside of the scope of a function. So if you're in a function and you create a variable, it's local to that function. Only that function can use it. But if you create a variable outside of any function, then it's available to the whole world. That's how global variables work within PHP. So global variable equals hello world, and it is global. So here's what I'm going to do. Ignore this stuff here. This is just to help me display it for you guys. But then I say echo 1 outside of a function, global var equals global var. Then I print global variable using a function called a. I say what the value is again. I print global variable b. I show what the value is again. So let's go ahead and see what global var a and global var b are. In global var a, sorry, Joshua's not going to be able to see this unless I put it up at the top. Actually, it's not zooming in on it. Anyway, okay. Global var a here does this. It prints a message just saying what's going on so that you guys can be helped with that. And then we set the value, global var, to a value new value, and then we get out. So we print it, and then we get out, is basically what we do. In global var b, we do the same thing. We print it, and we get out. The only difference is this line right here. You see this? Global, and then I list the variables that I want access to, the global variables that I want access to from within this function. Now, let's see what the output of this is. First of all, outside of a function, we've just set the value, and we say global var equals hello world. Then we do print global var a, and inside a function without that global statement. No global statement there. And we print global var equals nothing. There's nothing there. And in fact, depending on what your settings are in PHP, you may generate an error at that point. Then we set global var to a new value within that same function without that global statement. We come back out to the top. Okay, so we're not in our function anymore. We're back up at the top, and we say outside of a function, global var equals hello world. Not new value, but hello world. You see that?
Just going to the top of them.
Right. So I set it to new value, and then I went back up to the top here and said, notice the 2 here, 2 outside of a function, global var equals global var. I just set it to new value down below, but it still has hello world up here. Why is that? Because I didn't have the global. Now the second function is identical, global var b, except it does have the global statement. So I'm in here, and I print off the value, and instead of printing nothing, it prints hello world, because it recognizes the value. It pulls that value from the global tables. Then it sets the global var to totally new value, and ends the function. Then outside of the function, back up at the top again, we print the value, global var equals global var, and global var now has the value of totally new value. So I'm demonstrating for you the importance of having that global at the top of a function if you actually want to use a global variable. Clear on that?
Yeah,
What the purpose of it is?
This is all within a single script. I thought global variables were for between scripts, but that's not the case. It's all within the same.
It's all within the same script. The only time you would have communication between different scripts are either using your sessions or your cookies, or if you were including other scripts in your current script. Okay? So let's go on now and go to step number 2 here. And this time I'm going to show you about passing in values to a function and passing by value and passing by reference. Huh? What? Let's look at it. So we're now on to step number 2 here, and I am giving the variable foo the value 5. Everybody sees that? Now, outside of the function, foo is foo, and I'm going to do that once, twice, 3 times, 4 times, 5 times. And sorry, now I'm going to have to update this again. I didn't realize I was misnumbering them. Okay, so 5 times I'm going to print foo equals foo, but I'm going to call these 2 functions. One is change arg A, and the other is change arg B. Change arg A is defined like this. Function change arg A prints something off and adds 10 to the value of the argument that was passed in. Change arg B does exactly the same thing. It adds 100 instead of 10, but notice this ampersand right here. Do you see that ampersand? Mm-hmm. That means that we are passing in a reference to another variable rather than a value. If you pass in a value, it's a copy of that value. If you pass in a reference to, it's a reference, so you're both pointing at the same value. So let's see what happens. Remember, A adds 10, B adds 100. A is passing in a copy of the value, B is passing in a pointer or a reference to the value. So when we load this up, we have the value 5. We call change arg A with just $A. We add 5 to it, and we print it off again. Still 5. Because we made a copy of foo, and we passed that copy in to change arg A. It added 10 to the copy of that value, so that became 15. But it didn't change foo.
Foo is still 5.
Foo is still 5. Now, in the next step down, right here, we call change arg B. And notice the ampersand next to the value here, next to the argument. That means we're passing in a reference to $foo. Okay? So we pass $foo to it, and we add 100. Now when we come back down outside of the function, now foo is 105. Now, change arg A, again, still 105, because we just added 10 to a copy of 105. And then it goes to 205 because we add 100 to the actual value. So if you want to change the values of the arguments inside the function, you must have an ampersand in front of that argument. Normally you don't do that. Normally you pass in copies of values and use those copies of the values. But if you want to change them, make sure you put an ampersand. Are we clear on that?
Yep.
Yes?
Yeah. Yes.
No? Okay. Good. Let's go on to step number 3. Now we're going to deal with optional arguments. You can have functions which have required arguments and optional arguments. The way you make an optional argument is by saying this. You give it the variable name, but then you say equals, and then you give it some default value. That could be 23, that could be false, that could be null, that could be hello, my name is Sam. You can put whatever value you want. Any value that you could assign to a variable, you can assign in this context. $foo equals, and in this case I've given it a string, default value. Now down below I've got another function where I've said $foo, the first one is default value, and $bar is another default. So I've given two optional.
How will it know which one to use?
By the order. The order of the arguments is absolutely, categorically definitive there. Okay? Good, so let's see how this works. Back up in printarg. We call printarg with no arguments, and it prints off and says foo equals default value. So we'll go up to step 3 here, and this was the call, printarg. No arguments at all, right? And down below it says if it doesn't have a value, then use this. And so what it prints off in this echo statement right here, foo equals $foo, it prints off foo equals default value. Next time I call it and I say print arg, and I give it another string. So I'm up here. I have to get this to the top so that Joshua can see it. Okay, I call print arg with another string. I give it an argument this time. And in that case, it overrides the default that I set down here, and it gives me another string. So this time, I call print args with value passed in, excuse me, I'm up here. Print args with another string, and I get foo equals another string. Then I do the same thing again with no arguments, and again I get default value. See how that works?
Yeah.
Good. Now we'll move on and we'll do a function with two optional arguments. Function printargs with $foo and $bar with these default values. When I call it with no arguments, I get foo equals default value, bar equals another default. With only the first argument, okay, so I say printargs value passed in, then I get foo equals value passed in, but bar, because it's the second one there, gets another default. You see how I can override the first one without overriding the second one. I keep the second one optional.
Parameters connected by commas?
Yes, the parameters are connected by commas, okay? Now, here's where this becomes important. Let's say I want to call it with only the second argument, print args, and then I just put a comma there and say second arg passed in. Well, syntax error. Now, I didn't demonstrate it for you because I couldn't show you the rest of the program as long as I had a syntax error in my code. But as soon as I did that, it's a syntax error. You cannot override the second optional value without overriding the first one. You have to give values to all the arguments up to the last one that you want a non-optional value for. So from the beginning, you have to establish those values until you're ready to let the defaults take over. All right, and then I can also give it both arguments here. So I give it first arg passed in, second arg passed in, and then foo is first arg passed in, bar is second arg passed in. Are we clear on that? I just covered a lot of material. I covered global variables. I covered variables passed to functions by value and by reference. And I talked about optional arguments. There are 3 fairly big topics, but I think they're things that you're probably going to want to know about while you're doing your projects. And so that's why I wanted to cover them. All right? Very good. Have a good one, Joshua.
So they're all about